Shalom, shalom aleichem, and baruch habayim. Peace to you and welcome to Hebrew Class 2 of our series of 7 Hebrew classes with our Hebrew 101 course here at Mashiach Yisrael. I'd like to open with a brief word of prayer. Ribbona Shalom, Master of the Universe, we are thankful. We are so thankful that you've given us the opportunity to learn your language, to study your word, to study your Torah, and connect with you and everything that comes along with it. We ask you to be here with us tonight. And we ask you to bless our study, bless us with wisdom, understanding, and knowledge that we should be able to serve you better and have a more intimate connection and relationship with you at the end of these classes. We'll end with the blessing, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kidshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu le'asok b'divrei Torah, b'shem Yeshua HaMashiach, amen. Blessed are you, Lord our God, King of the universe, who sanctifies us and betroths us with his commandments and calls us to study his words of Torah. Amen. Amen. So, we have the chuf up here, but we're going to actually start with a little bit of a review. Okay, so as class 2, tonight we're going to cover chuf through the last letter, the tav. But as a review from last week we covered the first 10 letters of the Hebrew alphabet, aleph through yud. So I would like to repeat, I'm not sure if we got on the last tape, but you're going to get as much out of this course as you put into it. Right? So study, study, study. Practice your letters. Use the practice sheets in the back of your handbook, of your workbooks, of your handouts, so that you can understand primarily what the sound of each letter is, right? What sound does the letter make? That's the most important thing for you to know. Also, we discussed the GEMATRIA, the meaning of the letter, the graphic design, all that stuff is wonderful and fantastic, but you're not going to be able to speak the language until you understand the letters. So it's most important to know what sound each letter makes. So in that sense, we'll have ourselves a little bit of a review. First letter of the alphabet was the aleph. Huh? What sound does the aleph make? The aleph is a silent letter. It doesn't make any sound at all. We said it has the gematria, the numerical value of 1. It symbolizes the one God, as he is our leader and our teacher, Baruch Hashem. Second letter was a little trickier if you remember. Second letter was the bait, the bays.
Funny you said Baruch Hashem as you segue.
Baruch Hashem begins with the letter bait, with the letter bait. So, what sound does the letter bait make? What sound does this letter make?
V.
This is technically a v, right? Because there's no dagish. So if it doesn't have a dot in the middle, if it doesn't have a dagish in the middle, then it's going to be pronounced v, like in Victor, right? If it's got a dot in the middle of it, that's a pretty big dot.
Same letter. Just
Same
a
letter.
soft sound.
Now it's a harder sound. With the dagish, you get a harder sound. So instead of v, it's b, like in boy, right? So that's the second letter. We also talked about the numerical value 2 represents God and us. The graphic design and the name and the meaning of the letter is bait. It's a house, right? Bait means house, that God wants to live with us together in this world. And that's the meaning of the purpose of the creation of heaven and earth, really. Exodus 25, verse 8. Have them build me a tabernacle so that I can dwell within them, right? God wants to make a home with us here. Third letter is the gimel. The gimel makes a sound like G, like in giraffe, right? No, not like in giraffe. Like in as in gorilla. Thank you very much. The gimel has a numerical value of 3. Makes, again, a sound like a G, like in g, like in garage. The numerical value of 3. It has the shape of a man running to give charity, and the meaning is gomel, he who likes to give, right? He who is running to give, as God gives us so much, Baruch Hashem. Fourth letter of the aleph bait is the dalet. The dalet, it's not a very thick line, there you go. The dalet. It's the fourth letter. It makes a sound like a D, like in dalet, like in dog, like in day. And has the numerical value of 4, representing the 4 matriarchs, right? This is the receiver. As you can see, the dalet's facing this way, right? But it's got this little yud on the other side so that it's kind of reaching back, in a sense to be able to actually receive because it knows that it needs it. And then the name dalet, a dolet, is a poor person, right? Someone who's ready to receive. The fifth letter of the Hebrew aleph bait is the hey. Hey is a very important letter. They say the world was created with a hey. Anytime you're going to speak a word of Hebrew, right, it always is going to start with a hey. When you write, it starts with a yud. We'll get there. But when you speak it, it's always with hey is a light letter. It begins with breath. Anytime you speak, it begins with breath. In the same way, God made this world through 10 utterances. Yehi or, let there be light. Yehi rakia, let there be a firmament. And as such, God created this world with the He, and the world to come with the Yud. He has a numerical value of 5. 5 relates to the Torah, 5 books of Moses, the 5 books of the Torah. Let's go on to the next letter. Keep this review short. The 6th letter. What's the 6th letter? Vav. Vav is like a straight line. Vav is like a nail that connects one thing to another thing. We also talked about, and I know this isn't the class on prefixes and suffixes, but if you put the vav in the beginning of a word, it means and, right? And connects two things together. Vav is the connector. It has a numerical value of 6, which relates to the oral law, the Mishnah, right? Because God gave us the written law, but without the teachings of Moses, very difficult for us to understand the written Torah, and possibly impossible, right? So as such, God gave us the interpretation when he gave us the Torah on Mount Sinai through the oral law that he gave to Moses. That's what he was studying for all those days up there on Mount Sinai. Interestingly enough, again, we said last week, every column in the Torah, right? The Torah scroll is written with columns. Something like that, right? Each column begins with the letter Vav, with the exception of 10 columns in the Torah scroll. Why? Because the Vav, it represents connection, something coming from a high place, coming down to a low place, and that's exactly what the Torah is for us, God's connection with us. That's the Mashiach. The 7th letter looks very similar to the Vav, but it's a Zion. So it's like a Vav with a crown on it, right? If 6 is the masculine energy, 6 days of the week, then Shabbat, the queen of the Shabbat queen, that's the feminine energy, right? So it's basically a Vav with a crown on it. It makes the sound Z, as in Zion, like in zoo or zebra. In case we didn't say it enough, Vav makes a V sound unless it's a vowel. But this is a Zion, and it makes a Z sound like in, again, zebra, 0. It has the numerical value of 7, relating to the 7, all of the symbolism of 7 in the Bible, as well as the 7 letters in the Hebrew alphabet that have crowns on them. Zion is one of these letters. The 8th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the Chet, or the Ches. The Chet makes a sound like we don't have in English, right? Making these letters a little tall. Let's shorten this guy, huh? The Chet makes a sound like ch, like in Hanukkah. Again, you don't make the ch sound with spit. It's bouncing the uvula off the back of your tongue, right? There's no spit involved in ch, though sometimes it happens, you know. Spit happens. What are you going to do? So the Chet makes a sound like a ch, has a numerical value of 8, the very messianic number. All of the famous 8s in the Bible relate to us piercing into a new reality, a new world. The Chet is also a Vav plus a Zion, so it represents, and it's got in the Stam print, which I'll just draw for you real quick. That's not very good. So in the Stam print, it looks like that. You can clearly see the Vav next to the Zion under the little chuppah. This is the man and the wife in this new world that we're trying to make, right? So that's the Chet, makes a sound like a ch. Again, the most important thing to remember about the letter is what sound they make. At the same point, it's also important to know all kinds of other stuff, and that's kind of what is going to, with God's help, set our class apart a little bit, is that we can have a real flavor and a real depth of understanding what each letter means. So when you see it on a page, don't just think, oh, this is a B or this is a V. You can think, oh, this represents a house. This represents the marriage canopy, right? The Chet, which I just erased. Moving on. The 9th letter is a Tet, makes a sound like a T. Tet is shaped like a serpent, shaped like a snake. But at the same point, the most common word that we find the Tet in is Tov, goodness. Right? Goodness can be a slippery serpent for us. If we pursue too much goodness, some of that negativity, right? If we pursue too much goodness, it can become a stumbling block for us, so that's not good either. The Tet, again, makes it sound like a T with a numerical value of 9. Represents goodness, represents our achievements, our desire. At the same point, we got to keep those in check and make sure they're under God. And the last letter that we covered last week was the Yud. The Yud is a very tiny letter. It's just a dot. It's actually, let's put another letter here. So that's a hey. So that says kind of like hey. But So the yud is just a dot. It hangs above the line. Again, every Hebrew letter hangs. It doesn't sit. Like the English letters, they sit on the line. Hebrew letters, they all come from God, so they hang from wherever it is that God let it drop from. The yud represents God's wisdom. It represents the number 10, its perfection. It's also the first letter of Hashem's name, which is why I put the hey on this side, because I didn't want to spell it. But God's name is spelled, and I'm going to put dots in it, so it's okay to erase it. Yud, and hey, and vav, and hey, right? And this spells God's name, which we're not allowed to pronounce. In most Bibles, it's translated as Lord in all caps in the King James or whatever Bible it is that you're reading. So Yud represents God, just like the Aleph, but a little bit different. And that's the review from last week. You guys are all caught up and up to speed now? Bezrat Hashem. All right, let's start with the new letter. Oh, here we go. The 11th letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the letter Chaf, the letter Kaf. And it kind of looks like a backwards C if you're an English speaker. Chaf makes the sound like a K, like in kangaroo, or the sound like a C, like in cup, right? And then maybe that's helpful for you to remember because it's C like in cup, not like in city. And if you want something else to help you remember it, the C almost looks like your hand doing that, right? Like you cup your hand. This is the Chaf. Similar to the bait, when there's no dagish, when there's no dot in the Chaf, it's going to be a softer sound like ch, like in Hanukkah, right? But if there is a dagish in it, a nice big dot in the middle, then it's going to sound like k, like in kangaroo or cup, okay? So this letter makes a k sound. What does this letter make? Ch, like in Hanukkah, right? Or in Tanakh. So,
Softer than the chet.
a little softer than the chet. It's more.
Is it?
I would say the chet actually usually comes out a little bit softer most of the time.
Okay.
Because, and we were actually going to talk about this, in the English, right, you have these different letters that come up that you don't really see in Hebrew. So the translators over the years, right, it went into Greek, it went into Latin, it went into German, and we find the Hebrew letters changing somewhat, right? So the Hebrew alphabet in the language never changed. It always stayed the same. At the same point, typically when you have a chet, it turns into an H, right? So that's why people don't always say Hanukkah, they say Hanukkah, right? The chaf won't ever do that. It'll turn into a K. When you anglicize it, right. So the example we were talking about giving was Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim means Jerusalem. Yerushalayim is spelled okay. Yerushalayim. I think I spelled that right. Yerushalayim, is that a Shavah? All right, pretty close. So this is how you spell it in Hebrew, Yerushalayim, right? But typically, because in the Germanic, right, the J in the Germanic, and I don't know a lot of German, but the Gutenberg press and all that, the J made the Y sound, kind of like a Jarl, right, or something along those lines. So when we have, let's move our, move that up a little bit. So when we spell it, the Y in Hebrew, a yud, usually when you translate it from the Hebrew into the English, it comes out like a J, okay? R's stay the same. The U usually stays the same. The sh sound, which we haven't gotten to yet, typically the sh sound is going to turn into an S, okay? L stays the same. And Layim, that's a little bit much for people, so I guess they just made it Jerusalem, right? So that's how we get Jerusalem from Yerushalayim. Typically, yuds, they turn into J's. Shins, they turn into S's. V's, they turn into B's, right? The bait, they'll often translate as a B and not like a V. And so on and so forth. This really isn't a class on the history of language, but maybe that'll be helpful for you as you're reading through your Bibles. So the chaf, the kaf or the chaf, makes a sound like, well, let's test you, okay? What sound does this make? K, like in cat, right? And this? Ch, like in Tanakh. as in like ach, however, right?
But,
Or bach, like,
Baruch.
right. Or in Baruch, right? Baruch is spelled with a chaf. So, the numerical value of kaf, is 20. So we had from letters 1 through 10, it was the aleph is 1, and the beta is 2, and the gimel is 3, etc., etc. Once we hit yud, it goes 10, 20, 30, 40, and then once it hits 100, it hits a 100, 200, 300, 400, as we'll get to. But note for now that the sound of the chaf is a ch or a k, and the numerical value is 20. 20 is symbolic for us. It's meaningful for us. 20 is 2 tens, and if you have the design here, make that a little bit longer for you. It's almost like we have 10 on top and 10 on the bottom, right? So that relates to God's 10 attributes and our 10 attributes, or you could say the 10 commandments that we're under, right? The number 20 in Hebrew, you spell it out. I'm not going to write it for you. And we're not going to talk much about numbers at all, actually, except for this maybe, in regards to the way that you say the Hebrew number. But maybe in the future, God willing. But if you were to spell out the number 20 in Hebrew, it's the word esrim. Esrim. Esrim has a numerical value, if you add up all the letters, which I'm not going to do, to 620. 620 is an important number for Jews because it represents the 613 mitzvot, the commandments, plus either the 7 Noahide laws or the 7 rabbinic mitzvot like Hanukkah and Purim and blessings and things like that. More importantly, for our purposes here, 120 spells out the word keter. Keter. Okay? Keter means crown, like the crown of kingship. So the chaf, again, the graphic design of the chaf is like a hand, right? We're extending our hand to God. God is extending his hand to us. We connect somewhere in the middle. God's got his 10 attributes. God is kind. God is just. God is compassionate, etc., etc. We have a similar version of those attributes in us, right? God made man in his image. Man didn't make God in his image. So because of that, we look like God in the sense that we can love, we can be just, we can be compassionate, etc., etc. So we connect our 10 to God's 10. That's the idea of being under the crown, under the kingship, right? Accepting upon you the yoke of heaven, and this is the beginning of all the service. Similarly, if you were to spell chaf, chaf is spelled with a chaf and a pei, or a fei, which we'll get to, and that means like hand, right? Kapayim is hands in Hebrew, again with the same idea. Looks like a hand, and it's us trying to hold hands with God, really, is the chaf. And the only way to do that is to understand his kingship, right? Understanding he's above, we're below, and then we can have a working relationship, okay? So that's the chaf. Any questions on the chaf, or the kaf as it appears here? Thoughts, questions, comments, concerns? There's one more thing about the chaf. The chaf is one of the 5 Sofit letters, right? Did I get that right? Yeah, 5 letters, I think. The 5 final letters, final form letters, or Sofit letters, means that if this letter, and there are 4 others besides this one, if this letter comes at the end of a word, it's going to have a final form. The final form, or the Sofit form, looks like a long resh, pretty much, or a long dalet, right? It's a line on top and a long line that goes down below. So if you ever have a word, Bob, you mentioned earlier Baruch, right? How do you spell Baruch?
Bet, Resh, Vav, and a final Chaf.
Very good, right? You wouldn't ever spell Baruch without the final form, right? You wouldn't spell it like that because this is the last letter. So because chaf has a final form, which looks like that, okay? Because it has a final form, you always have to use it if it's the last letter. Incredibly rare, I can think of like maybe 1 or 2 times in the Bible, in the whole Bible, that you don't see a final form where it belongs. You'll always see it where it belongs, as a rule. So what does the shape of the final form chaf tell us? What's it look like? It's bent like a shofar, right? It's bent like a shofar. When do we use the shofar? On the holy days, the high holy days. Which holy day specifically do we blow the shofar 100 times? Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah. What's the purpose of us blowing the shofar 100 times on Rosh Hashanah?
Is to awaken the slumbering
The sleeping
soul.
Yid. I'll give you that. It's also to coordinate God as king, right? We blow the shofar to recognize God as king. Wake these people up and understand the king's here, right? You know, chest out, shoulders back, stomach in, head up, right? That kind of thing. The king's here, kind of a thing. All right. So the chaf recognizes God's kingship, right? Because it represents the crown, keter, but at the same point it also represents the shofar where we coordinate God as king, and it has this graphic design of a hand that you're trying to leave out, or hold out for God. Also, and I'm not going to spell it, but the chaf is used in the word kafufim. Kafufim means bent over, right? We need to understand God's on top and not try to push him down, right? I got a Doberman at home, and he always tries to put his head like on my shoulder or like on my head. No, I'm on top, right? We don't do that with God. So that's the chaf. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Let's move on.
To the 12th letter.
The 12th letter. What's the 12th letter of the Hebrew alphabet? It's the Lamed. The Lamed's unique because the Lamed is the only letter that extends above the line, right? So if the Lamed is being hung, it's also almost kind of being hung on this dot there, or this corner there.
The only one.
The only one that goes above the line is the Lamed, right?
Yeah, it can also look a little different than that, right? Just so that.
Oh, of course. The block form, often you'll see it, if you're just doing handwriting, it'll be something like that. Okay, that's fine. In the Torah and in handwriting, I typically draw it like that. And this is much closer to the stam, the way that it's written in the Torah. The Lamed makes a sound, as you might imagine, like an L, like in Lama, or in, give me another example, lap. You have your book in your lap, or in leader. So the Lamed makes an L sound. It doesn't change if you have a dagesh in it or not, no problem. The graphic design, the way that the Lamed looks, it's a vav on top of a chaf, right? It's the straight line like the nail that's on top of the hand here, which of course is very symbolic for lots of different reasons. The Lamed has the idea with it, with the shape, that it's coming again. It's the only letter that extends above the line, so it's information coming from a very high place, coming down to our level, and then integrating with us, right? Remember God's 10, our 10? So it's integrating with us after it comes from a very high place. We call this teaching, right? And interestingly enough, if you spell out the word Lamed in Hebrew, a Lamed means a teacher. So if you're ever going to say,
Lamod?
teacher,
Lamed?
Lamed, or a Malamed.
Means teacher.
Lamed means teacher.
There's another word too, more, which means teacher.
That's true. It comes from a different root, but also means teacher. And we talked about the aleph last week. You know, that also means teacher, but it comes from a different place as well, which is fine. So Lamed means teacher, right? Information coming from a very high place, coming down to our place, and then we have to, so this is kind of like the download and then the install, right? Comes from a very high place, and then we process it. We deal with it. Lamed, again, has the numerical value, or I guess not again because it's the first time, has a numerical value of 30. 30, which is supposed to be the age where someone begins their public ministry, right? You should begin at age 30 is an appropriate time if you're going to be in the public ministry. Similarly, the Levites, if you remember the Levite service when they were carrying the ark, they would begin their service at age 30, up until 50, right? That's when they would be able to carry the ark or the wood or the tapestries, whatever else was going on. So the idea of Lamed is to transmit God's word, right, from a very high place and deliver it to a new place. That comes with Lamed, 30. That comes with Lamed, teacher. So that's the four meanings of the Lamed. It makes it sound like an L, has a numerical value of 30. It means teacher, and it's shaped like the download install process, I guess you could say. Any questions on the Lamed? we're zipping through tonight, right? Baruch Hashem.
So lamed is the word for teacher.
Lamed, a malamed is a teacher, yeah. Okay. Any other questions on lamed? 14th letter? 14th letter. No. 13th letter, thank you. I do English math good. All right. The next letter is the mem. The mem is shaped kind of something along the lines of that.
In block, it looks a little different.
So let's address that. I'm glad that you brought that up. In block, you'll see, and watch me write this, please. You'll see it like this in the block print, okay? If you can be so kind as someone to flip to that page where it shows you how to write each letter for us, and maybe hold that up so that the camera can see it.
That's one, two, 3 pages from where we were on the handy.
Okay. Hold it up so the camera can see it.
And that is right here.
Right there in the middle, okay? Looks like a triangle. There's nothing wrong with drawing your mem this way. However, we learned every time you write a letter, it begins with the yud. That starts at the top left corner. On that diagram, it says that the first stroke that you make should be this. That's incorrect. That's not right. You always start with the yud. So it's not like that, it's like that. Okay?
Yeah.
The graphic design of the mem. Well, before we talk about the graphic design, what sound does the mem make? Like water.
M.
Ma, like in mom, or is in Mary, or in whatever it is that you'd like. The mem makes a sound like an M sound. The graphic design of the mem is like a vav with a chaf next to it, kind of. You see that? Which again is why it's so important to start with the yud, so that you emphasize that straight line that's on the left side. Mem, it makes a sound like an M. Mem has the, well, we were talking about the graphic design, let's go with that. So mem has the graphic design of a vav with a chaf next to it. It's like a womb, okay? The mem is like a womb. It's a closed off letter with a small opening, right? And we find that the numerical value for the mem is 40. Any idea why 40 might be important in the Torah, in the Bible? We hear a lot of 40s, right? 40 years in the desert, and this was the womb with which God could take them from a slave mentality into the people of God, the upright of God, the princes and princesses of God, right? That took a 40-year process. 40 days it rained when Noah's flood happened, right? Cleansing the world. In our world, we know about a mikveh. A mikveh is a ritual pool, a baptismal pool, if you will. It's where someone goes to remove their impurity, right? Immerse in a mikveh, and then you become clean, right? You can remove impurity because of this process in the womb. And when you're in the mikveh, you get down and you feel like God's surrounding you in every spot, just like when you were in your mother's belly, right? So mem represents a womb that transforms you, that changes you, also represents purity. Mikveh, of course, begins with the letter mem, but the kosher amount of water, volume of water that you need to have a kosher mikveh is 40 saw, right? A saw is like 2-point-something gallons. So I think a kosher mikveh today is, I might be wrong on this, but I think it's 87.6 gallons, right? So it needs to be 40 saw to be a kosher mikveh. And interestingly enough, most mikvehs today, almost all the mikvehs today, as far as I can understand, are shaped like a mem, right? They're shaped like squares.
It's the number of Messiah as well.
It's also the number of Messiah, right? The Messiah begins with a mem. Moshe begins with a mem, which brings us to our next point, Reb
A
B'Tzalel.
lot of 40s in Moshe's life. He was 40 years in Egypt before he
Days on the mountain 3 times, right?
right, and then he was 40 years
In the desert.
in Midian before he came back to Egypt to lead the people out, and then 40 years of his final 40 years was leading the Israelites, the
Right.
Israelite nation.
100% true. So 40 is the number of transformation, right? We take time to be able to get to where we need to go. Mem is one of the 5 Sofit letters. So Mem has a final form. The final form of Mem is very similar. It looks like this. But the difference, I don't know if you could see that well enough, is that the final mem is closed. There's a opening in the womb here, if you will, and that doesn't exist in the final mem, right? So who's the first mem? Moshe Rabbeinu. Moses, our teacher Moses, is the first mem. And there was a way that we could mess up, right? There was more that had to come out. There was more that had to be done, right? There was more that had to be transformed. Who's the final mem?
Yeshua.
Mashiach. Yeshua HaMashiach, right? Mashiach, in Mashiach's world, and there's a whole bunch about this, and I'm just going to be very brief. Yosef and Yehuda had an argument. What's the best way to serve God? Joseph, he was in Egypt. He was the viceroy. He walked the halls of fame and power for 80 years, and he didn't become corrupt. Yehuda said, we got to be shepherds. Judah said, we got to be shepherds, right? We have to be away from the city. That will corrupt us, right? So God said, or they asked God who was right, and God said, you're both right. What a Jewish answer, right? In our world, we have to be like Yosef, still with a doorway to the world, right? Still interacting with people, still being a light to the nations, still trying to make straight in the desert a highway for God. When Mashiach comes back, gates are closed, like in the Elon on Yom Kippur, right? We're going to all be in the womb together. We're going to be with God. God will be with us. And there's no need for this external reality anymore, right? That's the final mem. That's Yeshua. That's why it's closed. Mem. That's the graphic design. It makes it sound like an M. It's got the numerical value 40, which hints to transformation, to Moshe, to Mashiach. Mem, if you spell mem, it's spelled with two mems, one closed and one final. And that's very close to the word mayim. Mayim in Hebrew means water, right? Mayim, water. So water, very similarly, is that which brings us to transformation. Because water can come from a very high place and go down to a very low place, which is the Torah, right? By the way, anytime you read in the Bible, mayim, water, you should think Torah, right? The sages say, Ein mayim ela Torah, right? There is no water except for Torah. Torah is water because it comes from a very high place and it goes down to a very low place. And it's still the same water when it gets down there, right? At the same point, mayim is the universal solvent of life. It's what our bodies are made up of. We have the Torah within us. It's also the agent which cleanses us, right? We immerse in the water in a mikveh to die in our sins, to come back up a new creation, right? That's the whole point. That's the whole point of the transformation. It happens through water. And there's a lot more to be said about water, but in the frame of this class, we can just keep moving. Any questions about the 4 points of the mem? The way it sounds, it's like a mem. The numerical value, it's 40, which hints to transformation. The shape is like a womb, open or closed. And the meaning, mem, is like mayim, like water, because it represents the Torah. Because Moses was on the mountain for 40 days, and he got the Torah. Any questions? Moving on. Number 2. Apparently I'm bad with numbers tonight, so number next. Okay.
14.
14, the 14th letter. Let me take a quick sip here. Okay. Next letter of the Hebrew alphabet is the Nun. The Nun kind of looks like that. Very similar to a Gimel, but whereas the Gimel had the leg coming out like this, the Nun just has a line on the bottom.
A foot.
It has a foot. It's bent, right? The Nun is bent. Might as well get it out of the way. The Nun also has a final form. It's one of the 5 final Sophite letters. And the final form of the Nun looks like this. It's one of the letters that extends way down below the line. Nun makes it sound like a N, like in Nun. What, Nun? Like in None Your Business? No. It makes it sound like an N. It has the numerical value of 50. 50 is also kind of like a number of transformation. We know that we count 50 days in between Passover and Shavuot. And each one of those days we count the Omer. We call it counting the Omer. What is supposed to happen to us while we count the Omer? We're supposed to be leaving the 50 gates, known as 50, the 50 gates of impurity, and going through the 50 gates of wisdom. So again, Nun represents a transformational process, but in a little more linear sort of a way, as opposed to the more open desert feel that we get from mem, which is like midbar by midbar. So nun represents 50. It's the number of transformation. Again, we can only do 7 times 7 ourselves, right? The next day is the Shavuot. It's the Pentecost. It's the giving of the Torah, the giving of the Spirit, so that we would be able to actually do something with it. That step God has to make. And in that sense, nun is related to God. Nun is God. It's like a vav, right? It's God's energy coming down from a high place to a low place and then collecting here in an ideal situation. Or maybe we didn't collect it, right? And we let the energy drop down very low, below the line, into the realm of impurity, right? So the long nun represents the energy from God going all the way down into the darkest places in the world. And the fact of the matter is, everything comes from God. There's nothing that doesn't come from God. The angel of death, the evil inclination, the Satan, all of this is God sent, right? Read the first chapter of Job. God controls everything. There's nothing that exists without God and God's direction. As such, nun represents energy flowing from up to down, similar to the vav, but in a different way. If we bend ourselves, right? Oh, question?
Yeah, I was just trying to make a note on that. You said like the counting the arm, number of transformation, we ascend the 50 gates of impurity to the 50 gates of
Wisdom.
wisdom.
We leave the 50 gates of purity, we go through the 50 gates of wisdom, right? Almost like it looks like different on each side that you look at it, kind of. So again, God's energy coming from a high place to a low place, and if we are bent, if we are kneeling like this, right? If we are on our knees and we are beseeching God, then that energy can be collected and gathered within us, and then it becomes a very good thing. If we miss that opportunity, we didn't pray because we were too whatever, right? Because we were too whatever, then that energy falls and it goes down low into the realm of impurity, and it's very difficult to get it up from there, right? So that's the nun makes it sound like an N. It's got the numerical value of 50, which again hints to transformation, but in a linear sense. It's got the graphic design of God's energy coming from a high place going down to a very, very low place, unless we catch it with our humility by bending ourselves, by bending our mannerisms and habits and patterns. So what about the meaning of the word nun? We find that the word nun is spelled like this, by the way. Nun is just nun, or if you spell it full, nun vav nun, right? Nun. So where else do we find this nun? We find it, interestingly enough, in the word chanun. Anybody know what the name chanun is? It's from the 13 attributes of mercy. Remember what the 13 attributes of mercy are? Hashem, Hashem, Kerachem, V'chanun, right? Lord, Lord, benevolent God, merciful and gracious, right? Chanun means gracious. Chanun means gracious. How is it that God's energy is able to come from a high place and go down to a very low place, and somehow it gets caught with us and it doesn't descend into impurity? How do we not fall through the floor, right? Scientists teach us that atoms are made up of like 99% empty space, right? So how am I not falling through the floor right now to the basement? Because it's God's grace, right? It's the gracious one who allows us to be here, who allows us to catch his energy, who allows us to relate to him and reflect back to him as water mirrors the face. So that's the nun. Any other thoughts, comments, concerns on the nun? I'll tell you a little joke I heard from my teacher of blessed memory. He said he was at a party one time, a 50th birthday party for someone. Remember the numerical value for nun is 50, right? So they had a big banner for the guy, and the banner said, "Happy afternoon," right? Because after 50. All right, I'm sorry. We'll go to the next letter. We'll go to the. I'm sorry.
That was hilarious.
Thank you. Warrants a chuckle, right?
That was hilarious.
All right. I won't quit my day job.
It's funny, I saw a card like that,
Oh, really?
a Jewish birthday card.
Happy afternoon. I think it's good. All right, next letter. What comes after the nun? It's the samech, yeah?
15th letter.
The 15th letter, thank you. Which is the samech.
So,
The samech is shaped like a circle. Apparently not a very symmetrical circle. Sorry about that. It's shaped like a circle. It makes the sound S, like in Sam, or in snake, serpent, or as in sunshine, right? S. Samech makes a sound like an S. We're going to find another letter later that makes it sound like an S. We'll get to that when we get to it. But for now, just know that the samech makes it sound like an S. Samech has the graphic design, we'll start with the graphic design, of a circle. It looks like a circle. What does a circle represent? You go to a Shiva house, right? People are mourning their lost loved one. And people bring over gifts of food, right? We're Jews, we bring over food, not flowers. So when we do that, what kinds of food are we customarily, traditionally supposed to bring? Circular foods, right? We bring eggs, we bring bagels, maybe you bring a pizza, I don't know. Something that is a circle. Why do we do that? Because it represents the circle of life, right? The circle of life. The end is wedged in the beginning. This is the pattern that God made for us. A year feels linear to us, but really we hit the same dates every year going in an upward spiral, right? So Samech is a circle. Where else in Jewish life?
Hopefully it's an upward spiral.
Hopefully it's an upward spiral, right? Bezrat Hashem, with God's help. It will be upward spiral. Where do we find a lot of circles in a Jewish ceremony?
Wedding.
A wedding. Baruch Hashem, Torah point about. In a wedding, we have lots of circles. What are the circles? 3 circles, technically. 3 different kinds of circles. There's the ring, right? The ring that the husband gives to the wife on the 7th finger, right? The wife, she makes 7 circles around the husband. And then the chuppah itself is like a circle over, as we said with the letter chet, which I won't draw again. The letter chet looks like a chuppah, right? The marriage canopy. So there's 3 circles. There's the husband giving the wife. This is the provider, right? There's the wife encircling the husband. This is the one who builds the family, who makes the home, right? Because I can testify that there's no way that a home could run without a woman in it. So there's the ring that the husband gives to the wife. There's the circles that the wife makes around the husband. This kind of creates their personal space and the space of the home. And then there's God's circle over everybody. He's a third partner in marriage. And that allows them to have a place, right? A world to be in. That's like the house. So the Samech represents support. The husband supporting the wife supporting the husband in their various different roles. It represents the circle of life. Represents God's presence over us, right? His protective shade, His protective presence over us. What about the meaning of the word Samech? Samech. Samech, I think it's spelled with a chuf, so please correct me if I'm wrong here. But Samech.
They spell it out with a CH at the end, so I think so.
Samech.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Samech, you'll find in the liturgy, I forgot above there. You'll find this word somech. Somech. We didn't actually mention it, so we can mention it now. In the prayers in the Ashrei, we find somech noflim, right? God, He's the God who supports the fallen one, right? Nun, if you remember, the nun is like the energy that falls down, right? So a very common word associated with nun is nofel, right? To fall, like the nephilim, right? The Nephilim, they fell from heaven. So we say God is somech noflim. Somech means to support those who fall, right? So again, coming back to the idea of the circle and its perfection, being able to everybody support each other in the same way, right? Like the wall, or they're all feeding each other. So somech means to support, very similar to the graphic design. And as we remember that God is always above us, right? God is the third partner in our marriage. We understand that His idea of support helps us to nullify evil decrees, right? Nullify negative things that are happening to us. The numerical value of the Samech is 60. 60 is an important number. Again, it relates to the circle of life in the sense of birth. Isaac married Rivka when Isaac was Rebekah when he was 40 years old, but they didn't have their first child until he was 60, right? Well, he had twins, Mazel Tov. But so 60 represents the cycle of life, giving birth. At the same point, 60 is the number of nullification. When we understand that God is above us, when we get nullified in Him, in the circle, then we become pure. What am I talking about? So you have a nice pot of chicken soup, right? And the Yiddish mama, she's so sweet. And she's slaving over this soup. And she's cooking, and she has a cup of coffee, right? And the cup of coffee has milk in it. So she's drinking the coffee, she's stirring the soup, and up, a little drop of milk falls into the soup, right? As Jews were forbidden to eat milk and meat together, right? To cook milk and meat together. So you have to throw the whole pot of soup out that she's been slaving over? Chas v'sholem, right? if the amount of milk that was in the chicken soup is 1/60th, 60 is the number of nullification. If it's 1/60th, the soup is kosher. Okay? Don't use that to go ahead and add cheese to your stuff. But I'm just saying, if it's an accident and it's less than a 60th, it's kosher. You can eat it. And that's the law. That's the halacha. So 60 is the number of nullification, again, two becoming one flesh, symbolized by the wedding ring. It makes the sound like a S, like in Samech, or in Sam, or in Scooter. And it has the imagery of a husband and wife, the circle of life. I think we covered everything. Questions on the Samech? So, genius students here. No questions. This is beautiful.
So make no fleeing.
So make no fleeing. He
That's
supports
in our
those who
prayers.
fail. I'm sorry?
It's in the prayers.
Twice. 3 times, if you count. Well, depending on which prayer you're talking about. You say it multiple times during a day.
No fleeing, nephilim.
So make no fleeing. It's one of the morning blessings. Or, no, that's not right. So Kef Kafufim is, but that's kind of similar, but not really related. We say it in the Amidah, right? The second blessing of the Amidah. We say Somech Noflim. He supports those who fall. He resurrects the dead. Keeps his word to those who fell in the dust, who sleep in the dust, right?
As you keep speaking about Circle of Life, I keep thinking of Lion King. Simba.
Simba, the circle of life, you know? Hakuna Matata and all
Starts with
this.
his Sonic.
No, we'll start with Sonic Run.
Baruch Hashem. Somech Noflim. He supports those who fell.
Baked.
It's in Psalm 145, the Ashrei. And again, we say it multiple times throughout our day. Any other questions on the Samech? No? Very good. We're booking today. We'll be able to get done pretty well. Again, we're just doing the letters for last class, the first class, and this class, the second class. We're just doing the letters. Most important thing to remember is what they mean, or what sound they make, right? Understand that the Samech makes a sound like a S, right? And the Mem, it makes a sound like a M, okay? That's the most important thing to know. But again, here at Congregation Mashiach Yisrael, we like to go a little bit deeper, so we'll take you along for the ride. Baruch Hashem, this is online Secret Rewind, right? All right. What comes after the Samech? Ayin. Ayin. I'm going to draw the ayin in the stam just because we have a little bit of time, and I think it might actually help a little bit. That's terrible. Pretty close.
Not bad.
Pretty good. Pretty good. This is an ayin. Again, if you're just going to draw it, it'll probably be something along the lines of this, right?
Ooh.
Come on.
Wow.
It's a little more like.
Wow.
I can't see this range.
Oh, you can't?
No, but I'm sure it looks lovely. Baruch Hashem. An ayin hangs a little bit below the line, but not so much. Ayin is the second of 2 silent letters. All right, so it's very similar to an aleph. An aleph, again, makes no sound. Aleph makes no sound, ayin makes no sound. So it's going to take the shape of the vowel that you put under it. And we'll talk about vowels next week. But this could be ah, it could be oo, it could be e, it could be a, depending on what vowel you have with it. The ayin has a numerical value of 70. 70 is 7 times 10. 7 is the number of creation. 10 is the number of perfection. It's the perfection of creation. Interestingly enough, one place that you might find the letter ayin often is in the word olam. We say olam all the time as Jews. Olam means world. Remember final mem, right? Because the mem's at the end. Olam. Olam means world, universe, forever. So the idea of 70 is the perfection of the world, right? God created the world so that we should perfect it, so that we should partner with Him in creation. How do we do that? The graphic design of the ayin is like eyes. It's like 2 eyes. That's why I wanted to put these big things on top. And actually in the stam, it's got little crowns here too. So you could just say like those are like eyelashes, I guess. It's the eyes. It's the shape of the eyes. I heard a fascinating explanation from Rabbi Aaron Raskin in New York. And he talked about what scientists today understand what's going on as we see. Real sight doesn't actually take place in your eyes. It takes place in the back part of your head. I studied a little neuroscience, so he's 100% right on. So if you kind of have like a top view here, right? So like this is where the ears are, and this is where the nose is, okay? 2 eyes. There's nerves, the optic nerves that go back in your brain, and they meet at some point, and they cross at some point, and of course this is not the best anatomical drawing, but you can kind of get the gist. So most of your sight actually happens back here, in the back of your brain. That's where you process the images, the light rays that your eyes picked up. And they cross, and this is called the chiasma, the part where the optic nerves cross, and then you start processing the information. So, again, just for now, know that the graphic design of this is like eyes, the optic nerve, how we process things. It's about perception. Interestingly enough, the word ayin, the meaning of the word ayin, the meaning of the word ayin is an eye, right? An eye means, or ayin means eye, like your eyeball, right? Ein eye, eyes, the eyes of. So again, the graphic design and the name relate to the same thing, and that's very similar to the bait, right? The bait looks like a house, and bait is a house in Hebrew. So we see the world, olam, with our eyes, right? But we know that this is not everything that there is, right? We know that there's a story behind the story. We know that there's some stuff that's hidden that we can't see. All spiritual worlds, right? Lots of stuff going on. As such, we need to partner with God in creation to perfect the world, 70, right? Perfect the world in such a way that and how do we do that? By correcting our perception, correcting the way that we process the information, right? With our optic nerves leading back into the occipital lobe back here, right? So, you could have a negative perception, and then you get concealment, right? God says, Hester, Esther, what is it, Panai? God's going to hide his face from us. Esther means concealment. This is not what we want. We want God to be revealed. How is God going to be revealed in our life if I never think about him ever? If I never see him in my day-to-day walk ever? God's only going to be with us and perfect the world if we have God constantly in our mind, in our mind's eye, if you will. And that's how the world becomes perfected. So that's the ayin. It's a silent letter, the second of 2 silent letters. There's a numerical value 70, representing 7, which is creation, and 10, which is perfection, perfecting creation. It's going to happen through our eyes if we adjust our eyes appropriately. If we adjust our eyes appropriately, we have olam, we have forever, we have the world. If we do not have our perception correct, then we have Esther, we have concealment, right? And that's not as good. Any questions on I? Okay.
How do you say eyes in Hebrew?
Einayim.
Ein, ayin.
An ayin is an eye. Einai would be my eyes.
Einai.
Einayim would be eyes. Or, yeah, einayim would be eyes.
And it's spelled ayin. Ayin, nun.
Ayin, yud,
Nun.
nun.
Yud, nun.
That's an eye, right? If you have it not with the final form nun, but the bent one, and you go like this, it'd be like einai, my eyes. Any other thoughts on I?
Job 31:1
Job 31:1.
contains that very word. It says,
Amen.
a covenant I have made with my eyes.
Einai.
It is Berit Barati Le'enai.
Baruch Hashem. Baruch Hashem. See what we can gain from studying the scriptures? So now you know when you see I, there's a lot more. It means perfecting the world. It relates to the world, except it's dependent on us, and we have to change our perspective, right? Live in that tree of life mentality and not the tree of knowledge of good and evil mentality that we've been swimming in for years. So excellent comment. Thank you, Reb Basalam. Any other questions? Okay. Next letter. Next letter is the pei. Make sure I'm not moving this too much for us. The pei is kind of like a kuf, or a chaf rather, but it's got a little yud hanging down in it. Okay? In the stam, it's very beautiful, and you can see the white letters, which are pretty cool, and we won't talk about them here. But the pei for now, understand that the pei makes it sound like a P or like an F, okay? P is in Paul, F is in Frank. And how is that going to change? Can you guys guess now at this point?
Dagish.
A dagesh, Baruch Hashem. You can't be taught. So this by itself is soft, so it'll be fe, fe. Or if you put a dagesh in it, now it's pei, okay? Fe, pei, pei, fe, fe, pei, 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 pei. Okay. Pei makes it sound like a P or an F. It's got the graphic design of a mouth. This is like a mouth with like a teeth or like a tongue, okay? Funny story I heard about this. The Pharaoh of Egypt, he said, perhaps the Jews will multiply, right? Perhaps the Jews will multiply, said the Pharaoh. In Hebrew, if you want to say, perhaps you say pen, perhaps. So what did God do? God knocked out the tooth of Pharaoh. So now it's not pen, maybe they will multiply, but ken, yes, they absolutely will. Ken means yes in Hebrew. So yes, absolutely they will multiply, right? So pei is a mouth. That's just to describe the graphic design of the pei. So the pei makes it sound like a P or an F. It represents a mouth, and the mouth is going to become good or bad, right? That kind of depends on us as well. Pei has a numerical value of 80. 80 again is a very important number in Hebrew. 80 was the age of Moshe Rabbeinu when he went up the mountain, right? And he got us the 10 Commandments, when he got us the Torah, the 613 Commandments with the Torah. So what did Moshe say? He argued with God at the burning bush for a week, right? It's even better than me. I can't argue that long. So Moshe Rabbeinu, he argued with God for a week, and he said, I can't go. You can't send me. I am slow of tongue, right? I have slow speech. My mouth is not good, he says. You know, it's not going to work. And a lot of conversation happened, etc., etc. But the fact is, Moshe became the greatest teacher of all time. How is that possible? Because he recognized his weaknesses? Yeah. Because he understood after going up on Mount Sinai that it wasn't him speaking anymore, right? The Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, God's presence, it was that was speaking from Moshe's vocal cords, we say. And because it was God going through him and not Moshe's own mouth himself, because of that, he became the greatest, like I said, teacher of all time. To this day, we call him Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses our teacher, right? So Moses was strong not because he lifted weights, right? Or he practiced his oratory skills. He was strong because God spoke through him, because he recognized the flow of God's energy through him. And that's what makes all of us strong. In a similar sense, 80, say the sages of the Mishnah, of Pirkei Avot, they say 80 is the age of strength, right? This is when you can really start getting to that righteous place and having God be with you at all times. Pei, again, is mouth, so it's kind of like bait. If you were to spell pei, it would be like this. If you were to take the yud out, it's peh, which is mouth. Peh means mouth. So we say Torah Shebal Peh, right? Oral Torah, Torah of the mouth. Peh is mouth. So its graphic design matches its meaning, like with the bait and with the other letter that we just did, Baruch Hashem. So the sound of, what's the sound of this letter right here?
Fe.
Fe. It's a fe, right? And if I were to give it a dagish,
It becomes harder.
it becomes harder. Pei. Baruch Hashem. Very good. So this is the pei. Number 80 relates to strength. It relates to us recognizing God flowing through us. It's our mouth. We can use our mouth to speak evil like Pharaoh and get our tooth knocked out, or we can use our mouth to bring about creation like God does, right? A more perfect creation with God. Question?
There's a biblical verse to prove that it means strength.
Strength.
The years of man shall be 70.
Mhm.
80 if ye have strength.
Baruch Hashem. Again, pay. And we're not talking weightlifting here, right? Even though Moshe ran up the mountain at 120, right? He was still very fit. Okay. Questions on the pay? Faye?
Oh, you're not finished.
What'd I miss?
It is also Sophie.
Oh, it's also Sofit. Baruch Hashem, and thank you so much. You're absolutely right. So pay is one of the 5 Sofit letters. 1,000 apologies that I forgot that. Maybe we can cut that out, you think? I don't know.
No, you can't.
So if the pay is the last letter of the word, it's going to have a final form like our others. It looks just like the chuf, but it's got the little tooth too, right? So very same thing. One of the final form letters. Thank you for the reminder. We see this like Yosef, right? Yosef is spelled Yosef, right? Okay. Did I miss anything else?
No, I think we can go on to letter number 18.
Letter number 18, that's Chai. That means life. Interesting that the 18th letter is Chai, because it's a very righteous letter. No?
No.
Worth a chuckle. Right? The 18th letter is the Tzadi.
But it is an interesting letter.
The Tzadi, the Tzadik. The Tzadi makes a sound that we kind of have in English. We need 2 letters to make it.
Oh, right.
It's the TS or TZ sound, like in cats, or in Yahtzee, or in hats, or in anything else that makes it sound like in Yahtzee, okay? It has the graphic design, so it could be tzi, tsu, tso, etc., etc. It has the graphic design of like a nun, right? The bent nun, but it's carrying a yud on its back, okay? That's the graphic design. And similarly, it represents a person who is bent over and carrying somebody else, right? Somebody smaller, somebody younger who needs the help. It's a symbol of caring. Tzadi has the numerical value of 90. 90. 90 is, we have a rule in Jewish life. If you do something 3 times, it's like you really did it, right? If you did it once, it could have been an accident. If you did it twice, maybe you just messed up. If you did it 3 times, you like really did it. So the tzadi is 3 times 3 times 10, right? You really, it is punching home the idea of permanence, right? The tzadi is the numerical value of 90, which relates to permanence. And that's also related to both the graphic design of someone helping someone else, someone carrying someone else, and the word tzadi itself, tzadik itself, is a word in Hebrew, very famous word. So we haven't gotten to the kuf yet, but it spells tzadik, right? What is a tzadik? Who is a tzadik? A righteous person. Tzedek means righteousness, right? Tzadi represents righteousness. How do you acquire righteousness? You have to live till 90. No, I'm just kidding. How do you acquire righteousness? Practice, 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 right? It means you have to make it permanent in you. A tzaddik is someone who lives with God on his mind every moment of every day. At best, we get like 2 minutes while we say the Shema or something like that. You know, I mean, we don't really have that kind of connection with God. Well, we get a little bit of it, right? We get a little bit of a taste of it. The tzaddik lives there all day, all the time. You ever have that feeling that you just know God is with you and it like fills you up and it's overwhelming? Tzaddikim, tzaddiks, they live like that all the time, right? And that allows them to be a lot more useful than some other people. And we can all be a tzaddik. And it's important for us all to try to be a righteous person. How do we do it again? By helping our brother out, right? By carrying the yud. Or, the yud represents what we talked about. Yud is the first letter of the name of Hashem, right? God's name is spelled with a yud, begins with a yud. So if you carry God with you, right? If you carry the yud with you, you carry God with you all the time, you'll be a righteous person, right? That's what it means. So that's the tzaddik. Makes it sound like a TZ or a TS, like in cats or in Yahtzee. Has a numerical value of 90, indicating permanence. It's got the graphic design of someone carrying somebody else or helping someone else, or the nun, the fallen one, the bent over one who's carrying God's name, the yud. And the word tzaddik means righteousness, righteous person. Okay? Questions on the tzaddik?
You said it was the first letter of what?
Tzadi is the first letter of what? I'm not sure what I said.
I'm not sure. Okay.
Tzadi is the first letter of Tzadi, if that helps.
Okay.
All right. Other thoughts, questions? It's okay. It's good. All right. No more thoughts or questions. We can move on to the 100th letter. I'm just kidding. There's only 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet.
But this one has the numerical value of.
You got it. See? That's worth a chuckle. Baruch Hashem. Excuse me. All right. The 19th letter is the Kuf. The Kuf also extends. Oh, I'm so sorry. Before we go on to the Kuf, I forgot that the Tzadi is one of the final letters, final form letters.
Ah, it is.
1,000 apologies.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a regular Tzadi, as you would find in like. Oh, I just messed that up way bad.
It's actually the final.
The final. I like that. So Tzadi normally looks like this if it's in the middle of a word or in the beginning of the word, but at the end of the word, it's going to look basically like the big nun, right? The long nun, with the yud, still carrying the yud, being able to reach down even below the line. So Tzadi, final form, Sophic form of the Tzadi, goes below the line like the nun, but it looks pretty much the same, makes the same sound.
And actually, the Sophite form in the block is much simpler. It's like the just a straight up and down.
Oh, a straight
is
line.
long, and then that.
Yeah, I think you'll see that from time to time, something like that.
Yep, that's it.
Okay, that's fine. So now you'll know what to look for if you find it. All right, that's the Tzadi. Kuf. Kuf. It's the 19th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. The Kuf kind of looks like a P, I guess, but there's spaces here.
An English P.
An English P, I guess, yeah. I'm going to put a hey next to it so that you can see that it goes below the line, right? That might actually be like a little bit far below the line, but it goes below the line. The Kuf makes it sound like a K. People translate it often, sometimes you'll see like with a Q, because it kind of fits like in our English understanding. Makes it sound like a K, never a Q, sound like in quiet, not that. Not like in quiet, but like in kangaroo, with a hard K sound. Always a hard K.
Or a Q with a doggish.
I guess you can say that, baby steps, right? But it makes it sound like a K, like in cat, kangaroo, cowboy,
Kitty.
kitty. It has a numerical value of 100. 100 is 10 times 10. It represents what we should be, right? The perfection of all 10 aspects of ourself. At the same point, the Kuf is one of the two deceitful letters, right? One of the two letters of falsehood. The Kuf, and that's why I picked a hey over here, kind of looks like a hey, right? The Kuf kind of looks like a hey. If you remember last week, we put our little stick Jew in here, right? And we said, you could look up towards God, which is good. This is our way out. God's coming here, but it's a way out of our trouble. But if we look down, we could just fall and fall and fall, right? So the Kuf is kind of like the one who fell all the way down. As you can see, the line went all the way down. And it's not as hard as it is in the hay. It's more curvature. It's more bent. Okay? So it's the attempt at purity, kind of like the Tav, possibly falling a little bit short. And that means it's the onus is on us to be able to rectify it, right? To make it better, to elevate it from that low spot. The Kuf means a monkey, right? A Kuf in Hebrew is like a monkey. So a monkey, and you can almost kind of picture it, right? He's like bent over here, his tail's going down here. So a monkey is like almost human, right? Almost human. They have missing a few chromosomes or what have you. But they're not human, right? That's like the Kuf trying to be the hay, one of the letters of falsehood. Similarly, we find, interestingly enough, that in the in Hebrew, if you want to say falsehood, it's sheker. Sheker means falsehood. However, we find in the building of the Mishkan, of the tabernacle, right? God asks Moshe to take boards, beams, right? Wooden beams. How do you spell, or how do you say wooden beams in Hebrew? I know, you're just dying to say it, but wait so I can read it. Just kidding. Sheker means falsehood. Keresh is a board. I started that wrong. Just messed the whole thing up. Okay.
Just reverse the letters.
All right, rearrange the letters. Keresh means a board. And how were the boards arranged in the tabernacle? Were they flat like a log cabin in the tabernacle? The portable Mishkan tabernacle in the desert? The tent of meeting?
With the boards?
Were the boards like a log cabin like this? Or were they vertical like this? How were the boards in
Where
the
were
tabernacle?
the boards?
I'm sorry?
Where in the tabernacle were the boards?
They were a cubit thick and a cubit and a half wide, and they were plated with gold, and they went in silver sockets, and you hung the tapestries on them. The tabernacle.
Oh, okay, they were the uprights for the
Upright.
for the outer court.
Right.
For
So,
the,
and the inner court as well. For the
so
Mishkan.
they were upright, yeah.
Right. They weren't like a log cabin. They were up and down. That's what I was trying to drive at. So in this similar way, God gives us a world that's filled with falsehood, right? Filled with sheker. And it's our job to right it, to set it upright, to make it something yasha, right? Something upright. That's a little deeper meaning of keresh. Similarly, also related to the tabernacle, we have, I believe it's 100 silver sockets, and please correct me if I'm wrong with that. But all of these boards went into silver sockets, right? There were 48 boards, and each board got 2 silver sockets, and apparently there's 2 extra somewhere that I'm missing. The point is, there were 100 sockets in the tabernacle setup, and because of that, we have 100 blessings a day. Also, King David, there was a plague going on where he lost 100 people a day, and he instituted how we now as Jews say 100 brachas a day, 100 blessings a day. We say Baruch atah Hashem, Zokev Kafupin, right? Blessed are you, God, who makes wreck those who are bent. Blessed are you, God, Hamechim Mitzadei Gava, right? Who directs my steps, etc., etc. 100 blessings a day. And that is the way that we elevate this energy, right? We make it upright. We make it more like the hay by conforming the way that we work more like the hay, more like God's original plan, right? Setting it upright, making it straight. And that all happens, again, through our connection with God. And if you do everything that it says to do in the Siddur, in the prayer book, you'll hit 100 blessings a day, no problem. No problem. And if you're living your day with God like that each day, you're right on the road to being a tzaddik, right? So the kuf makes it sound like a K, has a numerical value of 100, representing 100 blessings a day, or also representing the idea of falsehood, right? It's one of these false letters, so it could be 100 if we make it 100, right? By setting it upright. Kuf again means a monkey who's like a human but not quite a human. You got to kind of grow. We have to grow up and not be animals, but be godly men and women, right? So that's the kuf. Any thoughts or questions on the kuf? No? Okay. Very good. 3 left. So, that's green. The next letter, what is this, the 20th letter, is the Resh.
Okay. We've got double.
Resh.
Sheet.
Resh. Resh makes it sound like an R,
I might have to-
like in rabbit, or in reverse,
are you missing?
R, a sound like an R. It has a graphic design kind of like a dalet. However, it's missing that little handle that the dalet had. Let's put a dalet next to this one. And this is tough because a lot of the times you'll see a resh or a dalet, and you might think it's the same letter. Look for this corner, right? If it's got the little yud hanging off the side, it's a dalet. If it doesn't have that, if it's a round, smooth curve on the right side, then it's a resh. And again, Resh is one of these letters of falsehood. It has to do with the idea of 200, right? 200 is like I want more. The Talmud says if you have 100, if you have 1, you're going to want 2. If you have 2, you're going to want 4. If you have 4, you're going to want 8. So if you have 100, you're going to want 200. It's the idea of being overcome in some of that pursuit. The word Resh itself means like a Russia, right? Do we know what a Russia is?
A Rasha.
Rasha.
Yes, it's a,
Not to be confused with Rashi. He was a good guy.
no, it's an evil person.
A Rasha is a wicked person, right? Not such a good guy. An evil person, a wicked man. So Resh has this kind of energy associated with it. Very difficult to deal with. At the same point, Resh is also famous for the word Rosh, right? Rosh is spelled a little different. Rosh, you put the aleph in, right? This is how you spell Rosh. Like in Rosh Hashanah, what is Rosh Hashanah? The head of the year. Rosh Chodesh, the head of the month, right? Rosh is the head, excuse me. How do you go from being a Rasha, a wicked person, to being the head? How do you do it? What do we add?
Olive.
We added the aleph. What does the aleph represent?
God?
God, right? See, that's why you study with us. Because you know the aleph represents God. See, this is God. This is you. This is the Torah. Okay? So, the aleph represents God. When you insert God into your wickedness, you become Rosh, the head, right? As we say, Baal Teshuvah, someone who sinned and came back, is in a more exalted place than the most righteous tzaddik who never sinned, because he's been tested.
That's how you spell Rosh.
That's how you spell Rosh.
Which is interesting because normally they all would be a Cholam Vav.
Almost always.
Yes. And now we haven't done vowel points yet.
No.
But the vowel point is above the aleph. Huh? Rosh.
Actually, the aleph is skipped entirely.
It's
Goes there.
Ooh.
It's a unique word. Don't get bogged up in the craziness. Just know that this word means Rosh, it means head, and we can be the head if we insert God into our situation, right? If we put the Yud back on the Resh, and we put God's name back within us, then we can become this poor person who receives God's goodness, as opposed to the Rasha, who was left to his falsehood.
So in this case, the aleph is truly a silent letter and it's a placeholder.
Right, it's a placeholder letter in this
Because otherwise, spelled without it, it could be a different word.
Right. It would be Russian. It would be wicked, right? We don't mean wicked. We mean head. So that's the Resh. Makes it sound like an R, like in rabbit, which aren't kosher. Nothing against the rabbit. They're very nice creatures. It has a numerical value of 200. It has the graphic design of like a dalet, but missing the yud, right? And it has the meaning, either the meaning is what you choose. It could be Rashi, it could be wicked, it could be Rosh, it could be the head. And how do you get there? By adding the aleph, adding God into it, adding the yud back. Any questions on the Resh? Thoughts, questions, concerns? No? All right. Again, that letter is very easy to confuse with the dalet. Maybe we'll just do it once more for everybody. That's a Resh, that's a dalet. They look very similar, but just remember that the dalet has that yud on the top right, whereas the Resh, it's curvy. Because Reshayim, wicked people, they're curvy, right? I don't know if that's true. Slippery, maybe. Okay. Second to last letter. 21st letter of the Hebrew alphabet is probably one of the more famous letters, and we've used it a bunch. The Shin. The Shin makes a sound like a SH, okay? An SH like in she, or in shoot, or in shy, etc., etc. Are we okay with the tape? Very good.
That is dependent on what? A certain
And how do you tell that it's a shin? Because it's got a little, I wouldn't even say a dagish, but it's got a point, a dot, on the top right branch here. If that dot is not there, and it also is on the other side like this, then no longer does it make a sound like a sh, it makes it sound like a s, like in sin, right?
Sin.
Sin, right? If you
And it has an S.
S sound. S sound like in sin. So if the dot's on the right, it's a shin. If the dot's on the left, it's a sin.
You're in sin.
You're in sin. Chas v'shalom. So it's this letter right now is pronounced like in san,
Sin.
which is very similar to the samech, right? Same sound. Same sound as the samech. Except when we take the dot off and we put it on the other side, it's a sh sound, like in Rosh Hashanah, right?
Mhm.
The numerical value of the shin is 300. 300 represents perfection. I know we've said that a lot, but it's a nuanced, this one's a little more nuanced. The idea is that there are 10 attributes, right? Wisdom, understanding, knowledge, love, fear, compassion, endurance, humility, bonding or friendship, and then sovereignty, kingship. And each one of those has the other 10 within it, so that's 100. And each one has 3 aspects, an internal aspect, an intermediate aspect, and an external aspect, just like the way our soul is designed. So that's 300, the perfection of everything.
This is absolute perfection.
Absolute perfection, right, as it has been attained. The graphic design of the shin is like a crown, right? It's like a crown. It's found in several different ways in Hebrew and in Judaism. This is the most common way, of course. And in this form, it's the crown of the 3 ways that we can connect to God, right? What are the 3 ways we can connect to God?
Through Torah,
Torah study,
mitzvah,
mitzvot observance,
and prayer.
and prayer, right? Those are the 3 ways we can connect to God. Also, the papas, right? Abraham, Isaac, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, Jacob, right? Sometimes, rarely, we find a shin that looks a little different, okay? Sometimes we'll find a shin, and it'll look like this, with 4 branches, okay?
That's a very unusual one.
Unusual, but it's important. This
Does that
shin
appear in Torah?
in the Torah,
I know where
I
it's,
don't think so.
know where it does, where it's used.
where does it appear?
It appears on the tefillin.
On the tefillin, right?
The rosh, the shell rosh. or
Right, the tefillin on your head,
tefillin,
right.
On one side, on the left side.
Right, on one side of the tefillin, the phylacteries, the boxes Jewish men use when they pray, it's got a regular shin like the one we drew before, one like this. And on the other side, it's got this one.
This one.
And this with the 4 branches here represents the matriarchs, right? 3 mamas, or 3 papas, 4 mamas. Also, when Mashiach comes and sets foot on the Mount of Olives, right? And he's going to change the topography of Jerusalem. I believe we're going to have a 4-pronged shin situation there in that case as well. When you are writing the shin, it's always going to look like a shin. But if you engrave it, right? If you push down and you engrave into it, you're going to find that the mirror image is this 4th one, right? The mamas and the papas, they go together, kind of like that. Okay? So that's the graphic design of the shin. Represents God's presence on earth, which is again through God's people, Israel, through the Jewish people, and those who choose to join themselves to us. So the shin makes it sound like a SH, unless the dot's on the left. Then it makes it sound like S. So this is pronounced like a seen, seen. And this is pronounced like a sheen, right? Where am I here? Sheen. The meaning of the shin, again, the new GEMATRIA is 300. The graphic design is like a crown, or the mamas and the papas. The
Musical group?
no, like the matriarchs and the patriarchs. I should probably be careful about that, shouldn't I? The meaning of the shin is spelled with a shin, and a nun. And it's very closely related to the word we have and we use a lot, shana, right? Shana. Shana means year. Rosh Hashanah, the head of the year. Shana means year. It's also closely related to the word Mishnah, right? Mishnah. What's the Mishnah? The book of Deuteronomy is called Mishnah Torah, right? Why is it called the Mishnah of the Torah? Mishnah means a second, or to repeat it a second time, right? Because in Deuteronomy we have a repetition of a lot of different mitzvahs, often in a slightly different way, and that's why we study Hebrew, so we can look at those slight differences and learn more nuances about God's word that way. But Shana means year, Mishnah means repetition, and the GEMATRIA of Shin is 300. So if we're going to acquire this perfection of all of our attributes through God's lens, it's going to happen over years, and it's going to happen through practice, right? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. That's why God has us praying 3 times a day, so that we would be masters at prayer by the time He shows up, right? They say, 10,000 hours of practice in anything, and then you become a master, right? God wants us to be masters in Judaism, so in the Torah, in His Word, and in that case, or in that sense, He wants us to practice, 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 right? Repetition. Repetition is how you get perfect. And perfect practice, right? Perfect practice makes perfect. Bad practice doesn't help. So that's the Shin.
So what's the meaning?
It's related to Shana and Mishnah.
Repetition, year is kind of...
Cycle,
years
circular.
Are circular, it's cyclical.
Cyclical,
And
there
it's
you
going
go.
to repeat. And so that's what it is, repetition.
Repetition. Related to the 300 idea of perfection. Questions on the Shin? Bless you. Don't hold those in, it's bad for you.
Repetition is kind of a funny word. It's got like a lot of eyes in it. Unless I misspelled it.
Happens. That's the Shin. What sound does this make?
Sh.
Sh, right? I tried to trick you there. Did you see it?
Yeah.
Okay. How about this?
Sin.
Like in sin, like in Yisachar, right? The one of the 12 tribes, Yisachar, with a s, not a sh. More often than not, you'll find it in the sh form. It's kind of rare to see it as a s, like in Sameach.
Right.
But
The stomach is used more for that sound.
I don't even think. Yeah, Samach is usually used more for that sound. I think Samach is actually, or Sameach is spelled with Samach, right? That's beside the point. Any other questions on the Shin? All right. Move on to the last letter of the Aleph Bays, and you guys are going to be like pros.
Number 22.
Number 22, the 22nd letter of the Aleph Bay. The last letter is the Tav. The Tav makes a letter T. It's a T sound, like in Tom or in Torah. Torah is spelled with a Tav. Torah. Also, and we're going to try to baby step our way through this every step of the way, but if you have an Ashkenazic pronunciation, okay, you are going to pronounce this as an S, okay, not as a T. The reason for this, again, is we talked about translation. Typically when they translate the Tav here into English, through Greek and Latin and German and everything else, this is translated as a TH, because the other one's translated as a T, right? It's very similar to the sound of the tet. Do you remember the tet? Okay? Same T sound. So I guess when the translators thought, well, this must be like a TH then, right? So very often you'll find that this is TH. So anytime you ever see a TH for a name of something in the Bible, you know that it's talking about this letter. Because the Ashkenazi Jews pronounce the TH sound soft, like in Sri, 1, 2, 3. This gets a sound like an S in the Ashkenazic dialect. Typically with our class here, we're going to do everything in Sephardic dialect, but it's worthwhile for you to know so that when you run into different words and you hear people say them, you're not going to get confused, you know? For example, this spells the word Shabbat, right? Shabbat, 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 Shalom, hey. Shabbat is the Sabbath, right? That's how you get Sabbath with a TH, because it comes from Shabbat. But in the Ashkenazic dialect, this would be Shabbos.
Shabbos.
Shabbos, right?
That
Shabbos.
changes the vowel. We haven't gotten there yet, but.
Right. I'm sure one of these is actually a commas, but I'm not sure which one. Not the point.
Or spelled effectively, you could call on the.
It's not with a cholam. If anything, it's with the commas. But we'll get to vowels later. So Shabbat would be Shabbos in the Ashkenazic dialect. I'm going to do a couple more with you just so you know some other examples.
But the comments too, there is an exception where in some words it has
An O sound, like in
Sephardi, an O sound, yeah.
And that's in Ashkenazic too.
Mhm.
And we'll talk about that when we hit vowels.
Mhm.
This is tzitzit, right? Like the fringes that we wear that's mixed with my microphone cord, right? The fringes, the tzitzit. In Ashkenazic, this would be tzitzis, right? With a s at the end, because there's no dagesh in it. If they did have a dagesh in it, right, then this would always be a hard T in Sephardic or Ashkenazic dialect. And we find this in in the famous blessing we make before we read the Torah. When you get called up for Aliyah, you say, Baruch atah Hashem, Elokeinu melech haolam, asher bachar banu mikol ha'amim, v'natan lanu et Torato. We would say Torato in the Sephardic dialect. Torato. Torato is spelled like that, okay? Torato. But because this tav doesn't have a dagesh, in the Ashkenazic pronunciation, this would be Toraso. So if you're listening to teachers from an Ashkenazic background, understand that that S sound that you hear may very well be a tav, okay? So just kind of remember that.
So in the Ashkenazic, if it has a dagesh, it's a TH sound. If it has no dagesh, it's an S sound. But that's Ashkenazi.
Reverse that.
Reverse that.
Right, it's a hard T with a dagesh.
It's a hard T, okay.
And then a soft T, like a TH, without a dagesh.
But it sounds like an S.
So it sounds like an S because it's softer. S is softer than T.
Okay,
right?
you kind of confused me in the TH and the S.
Sorry about that. So,
Ashkenazi sometimes often confuses me.
so let's see another example here. We have in the Bible, and I grew up studying the Bible like a Jew in Hebrew and stuff, and I just knew, I believe it's spelled like this. So this is the name of one of Levi's 3 sons, right? Levi. He had Kahot, Gershom, and Merari, right? In the English, somehow, and I'm not again 100% sure how this happens.
What is it?
Kohath.
It turns into that, right? With a TH at the end.
Right.
Again, that's a telltale sign that there's a tub at the end of the word, right? Not sure where they got the O from, but the rest I guess you can kind of figure out. So again, if it's got a dagesh, it's always hard. In the Sephardic, if it doesn't have a dagesh, it's still hard. In the Ashkenazi, if it doesn't have a dagesh, it's soft, like in Sri, 1, 2, 3. Okay? So that's the sound of the tav. Tav has a numerical value of 400. 400 represents the forces of impurity in this world. 400 shekels, the big ones. Abraham paid for the cave of Machpelah to bury his wife Sarah. He didn't pay that to acquire the cave from impurity. He already owned the land. He paid that price to remove the Canaanite from that land. I forgot what the gentleman's name was. So the idea is cutting away the 400, right? Getting rid of that level of impurity.
Didn't he buy it from Shechem?
No,
Huh?
No.
he was a Hittite, he's a Het, son of Het.
Son of Chet. I don't know. I'm drawing a blank as to the guy's
It
name.
wasn't, I'm thinking of a different transaction
Maybe.
from the last, I think, parsha we did.
Oh, with Dina? Maybe. God bless us. So the Tav has a numerical value of 400, makes it sound like a T, or an S if you're Ashkenazic. It has the graphic design of like 2 feet, right? This is one of the letters that actually stands on 2 feet fully, right? And it's tough to say that about the Chet because there's like it looks different in the Stam, but that's not an issue really. So what's different between the feet and the brain, right? Ego comes from the brain. We get all high and mighty up here, and then ego can blind our vision, right? The feet remain humble. They're the lowest part of the body. So, again, Tav is used to spell the word Torah, which we're all trying to learn so we can get closer to God. Excuse me.
This is interesting, because you said the meaning, especially the numeric 400 is impurities,
Right.
and yet it's Torah.
What does the Torah come to teach us to do? Elevate the impurity, right? To take the sparks that are within that got hid in this world and elevate them from the impurity, right? That we should be able to use the Torah's technology, use the Torah's information, use God's mitzvot to take this coarse world and refine it from a place that was impure to a place that's totally holy, right? That's the idea. And that's why it's 400, an even higher level of perfection than 300, which of course is difficult to understand. Again, how does that happen? With the feet, right? By us being humble, knowing that we are at God's feet, knowing that we are God's feet, and we have to take the Torah with us wherever it is that we go. The meaning of Tav, the way I see it, is very closely related. You'll see the word Tav almost appear at the end of all kinds of words. And we're not talking about suffixes tonight, but just bear with me for a second. In Hebrew, Av is father, right? Av is father, dad. Avot would be fathers, right? Avotav would be his fathers. That means his fathers, right? If we say avotav, if we say writing backwards here. Torotav, his Torah, right? God's Torah. Torahs, plural. So it denotes the idea of possession, right? Tav means it's yours. Your feet are yours, right? You have the ability to claim it. At the same point, if you don't act with that humility, then you're not going to be able to keep it, okay? We said that the shin is 3 levels, 3 ways that we connect to God. What are the 3 ways we can connect for a finite human to connect with the infinite God? What are the 3 ways?
Torah, mitzvah, prayer.
Torah, mitzvot, prayer, right? Torah study, the observance of mitzvot or good deeds, and then prayer. And it equals 300. So Tav is 400. It's the 100 of Torah study, the 100 of mitzvot, the 100 of prayer. But it's the 400, which is humility, right? If we remember to be humble, we remember it's God's Torah, then we can accomplish everything. We can raise everything to a state of purity with God's help, right? With his Torah, which is his Mashiach. That's it for Tav. Any thoughts or questions on Tav?
Except for the alphabet.
That's it for the alphabet. Baruch Hashem, we've gotten all the way through. So we've had a lot of teaching in these last 2 classes, talking about the meaning of the letters. Again, the most important thing to remember is what sound the letter makes, okay? So this is a Tav, it makes it sound like a T, all right? That's the most important thing to remember. At the same point, we also know that Tav represents humility, feet, the concept of lowering yourself before God, right? Understanding that it's God's Torah, and that's what makes it special. The Second Temple was destroyed because we didn't say a bracha on the Torah. We didn't acknowledge that it was God's Torah. We studied it like any other science, like geometry. The Torah is not geometry. The Torah is God, right? Mashiach, the Torah is God. Therefore, God's wisdom is God. God's will is God. You can't separate them from him any more than you can separate mine from me. And as such, by remembering it's God's Torah, that empowers us, right? But that's the humility that we're looking for. The bentness.